Good afternoon, all. Sean Kennedy, I am the Chief Planning and Implementation Officer here at Muni. So with that, let me pull up my slideshow presentation. I want to start with a little bit of good news. The FY 24-25 budget, which is this current budget year, has been shored up. And from a long-term perspective, we're having some very productive conversations with the Muni Funding Working Group, which I'll talk about a little bit more coming up. But they're helping us develop solutions for our budget issues in 2026 and beyond. However, all that said, the second year of our existing two-year adopted budget, which starts July of 2025, does have about a $50 million hole in it. So regardless of what the Muni Funding Working Group is able to do and the outcomes that we get from their help, we're still going to have a near-term budget hole and a near-term budget need of about $50 million that needs to be addressed. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to talk through timeline as well as process on how decisions are going to be made, and then when those decisions would go into effect. So before I get into the details, I did want to highlight how important Muni is for the region. Right now, Muni is carrying about 500,000 riders a day. That's roughly 75% of pre-pandemic weekday ridership. But we carry about half of all transit riders in the region. So if you take BART, VTA, AC Transit, Caltrain, Samtrans, Golden Gate, put all of those ridership numbers together from those different properties, you would still not even reach 500,000 riders a day. Not only that, we carry about 60%, or we have about 60% of all regional trips either starting or ending on Muni in San Francisco. So really, how Muni goes, so goes the region, and that's one of the reasons why a strong Muni is really getting a lot of publicity and support at the regional level. Over the last few years, we have been focusing on what we know helps grow ridership. That is creating a service that's fast, frequent, reliable, safe, and clean. We're attacking this from a number of different angles. For example, we now have over 75 miles of transit-only lanes in the city. Interesting sidebar, that is 2 times per capita the amount of transit lanes in New York City. So, we have really one of the premier transit-only lane systems in the country. We've got some new passenger information signage coming out that people can tell how crowded a bus or a train is before it even gets there. We've been cleaning both stops as well as stations, and spending a lot of resources to making sure that our property and where we interact with people is clean, and then doing really aggressive and outside the box maintenance things like Fix It Week, where our MOW colleagues have been shutting down the subway about once a quarter for a week early, and spending some time really fixing some maintenance issues so that we have fewer delays in the subway. And all these things are helping add to a strong COVID recovery. Well, like I noted before, we're somewhere around 500,000 daily boardings, about 74% pre-COVID on a weekday. I think what's most interesting about our ridership recovery isn't that we're at 75% pre-pandemic. It's when we're seeing these riders. People have changed how they use the Muni system. As you can see here, like for instance, our weekend ridership is almost 90% And, our evening ridership is also showing almost 100% recovery. Our midday ridership is over 100%. So we're really seeing people use the system differently than they were pre-COVID. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that downtown is still not recovered. It's only about 40% recovered from what I understand. And so we're seeing people take Muni across town from neighborhood to neighborhood at different hours of the service day. So really impacting our ridership numbers is the when, not just the how. Unfortunately, we are seeing some larger financial trends that is causing this large budget hole, as I noted earlier, about $50 million in year two of our existing budget. Specifically, parking and parking revenue is much less than anticipated, as is our general fund resource allocation. So when you look at the Muni budget and really the entire SFMTA budget, our biggest funding source is the city's general fund. And then our second biggest funding source is parking revenue and transit revenue. Both of those are down. Parking revenue is about twice as much typically as transit revenue, but still much lower than what it was pre-pandemically, and much lower than what we had included in our budget just 9 months ago when we got it adopted. One example of the parking revenue, I think there's a parking garage at Fifth and Mission that pre-pandemic was making $24 million or so a year, and now it's around $12 million. So just to show the drop off in revenue that we're seeing. And on top of that, we have our federal aid that we've been getting for COVID recovery will be expiring in 2026. So we have known that there was going to be a 2026 budget issue for quite a while, and that's why the mayor and the controller's office formed this Muni funding working group to talk about options, to talk through ways to solve this $320 million deficit that we're going to be seeing once we have exhausted the federal COVID relief money. Unfortunately, as has recently come to light, we have this second year budget issue of about $50 million that is in our existing near-term, already adopted budget. So whatever the Muni funding working group develops and comes up with for 2026 and beyond, it will not help us get through this $50 million budget hole that I was just talking through related to parking and the city's general fund being less than what we had originally anticipated. Consequently, we need to make up that $50 million hole, and we're putting together a number of things in a package that would equate to $50 million, mostly related to parking changes in parking revenue and increasing parking revenue. But we are also going to have to reduce some Muni service on the order of magnitude of about $15 million. So out of the $50 million hole, we're being asked to fill 15 million of that through reduced Muni service, which equates to roughly 4% of our service of our current service provision, about 60 runs or essentially work shifts. So it's a big ask, and I'm going to go over some details here in a few minutes. But before we get there, I do want to note that because this is an existing budget issue, starting in the second year of our budget, which means July of 2025, so 6 months from now, we're going to start having effects of this $50 million hole. So we don't have very long to put together a plan, have the board move forward with that plan, and then put it into place. So, this is going to be a very quick process. This really is kicking off the start of our public outreach, and we'll be doing public outreach for the next 2 months or so, hoping to and anticipating returning to the SFMTA board on March 18th to present to them our final proposal. Assuming they approve that proposal, we then need about 2.5 months to implement it. We take the service plan, it goes to, we then have to make that into actual schedule or shifts for the operators. The operators then get to sign based on seniority on what shifts they're going to be doing. And then we have to, actually implement that work. That usually takes about 2.5 months. So from final decision to implementation takes about 2.5 months, and we need to have it implemented really in the June timeframe, so it will be ready for that start of the new fiscal year in July. So that's the rough timeline, and as you can see, that really puts a real tight hold on our outreach process. We are we think going to be talking to a bunch of as many groups as we possibly can. We've developed some options that I'm going to go through here in a few minutes to really frame these discussions. The options are not meant to be either ors. They're not meant to be definitely one or over the other. They're really meant to just frame the scale of the project or the problem rather. So pointing out how much it's going to take, what kind of service cuts we'll need to be doing to get to that $15 million threshold. And then talk about and then frame the trade-offs, because how we make these cuts and these changes will reflect the values of both the agency and the city. So we want to talk through, and we created these buckets based on having a trade-off discussion and helping people talk through what they feel is the most important thing to protect as we move through these discussions. Before we talk about the discussion, I just want to talk about what the technical makeup of them. There's really 3 levers that we can use when we're making service, either additions, increases, or service reductions. And that is number 1, frequency. So how often, does a bus or a service come if you're standing on the street? The time span of that service. So what is the amount of time the service runs? If we're only doing a 9-hour window of service, we can do that with 1 operator shift. If it's an 18-hour service, obviously, then we need a 2-hour, 2 operators and 2 operator shifts to cover that service. And then finally, the route design itself, which basically means how long does it take for a bus or train to get end to end. And of course, if it's a more circuitous route, it'll take longer to get from A to B than if it's a more direct route. So these are the 3 kind of options, or the 3 levers that we've been pulling in order to come up with the proposals or the discussion points I'm going to walk you through. And then just wanted to point out, we make and have been making service decisions based on 3 main goals that the city is trying to advance. 1, improving equity. 2, helping with downtown recovery. And 3, providing environmental protection. During COVID, we found that, the number 1 way to build trust with our riders was to schedule to resources. And what I mean by that is that we, if you remember pre-COVID, we were only delivering about 93% of our daily service schedule. That means we were missing 600 trips a day. People felt that they could not rely on Muni because, they thought a bus, according to the schedule, a bus was supposed to be showing up. But we were not able to fill that run on that specific day. And so a bus didn't show up. So we suffered a lot from just people not trusting us. And so the last couple of years, as we've built back up from COVID, we've been very careful to schedule to resources, meaning that we schedule to 100% of the resources that we have available. We don't overschedule. And so, while we're trying to advance the 3 goals that I noted above, kind of the umbrella over all of those goals is rider trust and making sure that we provide 100% of the service that we are scheduling. Now, all of that said, I want to talk about the three scenarios that we're going to be talking with the public about. And once again, these are all designed around specific trade-offs and specific goals as a way to kind of draw out people's feelings about how best to make these changes. Scenario one is around preserving our high ridership routes. So one way to do these changes is to say, hey, you know, routes like the 9 San Bruno, the 14 Mission, the 38 Geary should not have less frequent service because they're already crowded and we're already having pass-ups and we're already seeing very crowded conditions on those lines. So let's not touch those, but instead that means we're going to have to take some of the less frequent routes and the routes that have lower ridership. What we've tried to do is remove routes that have parallel service. So other lines that are within a few blocks, and I'll show the actual packages here in a minute, but I just want to talk through at a high level the policies first. So you know, showing routes or removing routes that have alternatives for people to use. That's one way or one scenario to go. Another one is the reverse of that, which is, no, let's maintain all of the connections we currently have. Let's not reduce any of the connections we have. Instead, let's take service from some of our frequent lines. And that, you know, of course, will lead to pass-ups and lead to even more heavy crowding on some of these major lines. But it maintains access, you know, across the system. Third one is really prioritizing our equity neighborhoods. And, you know, it's really a combination of scenario one and two. It's really focusing on lines that do not serve our equity strategy neighborhood. So let's delve into each one of these three. And once again, you know, a caveat, these are not necessarily even proposals. They are ways to talk about trade-offs and to relay the severity of these changes, what a 4% service cut actually means. Each one of these scenarios adds up to that 4% number. So this first one, as I said, was about suspending lower ridership routes. You can see the dark orange routes are the ones that would be suspended. The kind of thinner orange numbers are ones that would have connection time span changes, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the gray lines kind of underneath are existing routes that would not be changed or modified. So the suspended service, like I said, was designed to be for routes that had parallel service within a couple blocks. So lines like the 31, where obviously Geary to the north and Fulton to the south. The 21 with McAllister to the north and Haight to the south. The 2 with both, you know, the one California right there, as well as several other lines. So those, and the 6, those full lines would be suspended. The 6 is an interesting one because just like we did during COVID, we would extend the 52 to make sure that the hill there in the southern portion of the route would be covered, as well as extending the 66 so that the Parnassus campus would still be served. So I wanted to point those out. But, you know, obviously very, very impactful for a number of riders. We would also in this package reduce some time spans. So the metro itself, the rail system, would stop running at 10 instead of midnight as it does now, and we would replace it with our OWL bus service. And then the connector routes, those little routes that go in the hills, like my line, the 36 line, and a number of other routes you can see here in orange, would end at 7 instead of 10 as they do now. So that's one set of changes. The second is, well, like I said, what if we did the reverse and we do not touch these connections. We maintain all of the existing connections, so none of the connections in this map have changed. What we're playing with here really is frequency changes. So we would decrease the frequency of the connector routes. Once again, like the 36 would go instead of a 30-minute service, it would be more like a 45-minute service, because we would take one whole bus off that line, as well as as you can see here, a number of other lines. And then we would drastically reduce the amount of service on our major corridors. All of our rapid corridors have both a rapid service and a frequent service underneath it. And they both run at almost typically the same frequency. What is different about them, what makes a rapid service is that it skips stops. It does not, it stops every 3 to 4 blocks versus the frequent service that stops every 1 to 2 blocks. So under this scenario, we would remove almost all, and I'll talk through why not a couple of them, but almost all of the underlying frequent service, beef up the rapid service a little bit to cover the extra demand. But it's not going to meet the full need. You're still going to have very crowded buses and pass ups. Specifically, the 5, the 9, and the 28. Those local services would go away and those corridors would only be served by rapid service. We would put and install a few more rapid stops on each of those lines, because there are several stops that we don't want to stop serving from the if we don't have local service there, we would add a couple of stops in each of those lines, but for the most part, the frequent service would go away and it would only be rapid. There are 2 corridors, the 14 and the 38, where we would keep the frequent service, just because there's just too many people and too much ridership on both those lines to totally get rid of the frequent service. But we would drastically reduce it, so it would go down to a 15-minute headway instead of a 10-minute headway. So, or actually 8 minutes on the 38. So, it'd be a lot less service on those lines, but we would not totally get rid of the frequent service. So, pretty impactful package of changes, but that is another option to reach that 4% threshold. And then lastly, scenario 3 is, like I said, kind of a combination of the two, but it really tries to stay away and not touch any lines that are considered equity strategy lines. You can see here we brought back the idea of suspending some parallel service on a few lines, specifically the 2, the 21 and the 55. We would slightly modify the 31 Balboa, so it would still go through the Tenderloin on its normal route all the way out to the beach, but it would not go south of Soma down to Caltrain. We would decrease, of course, the connector service again. Once again, those smaller routes up in the hills and in some of the smaller neighborhoods would go from a 20-minute or 30-minute service to a 45-minute service, because we would take a bus off each of those lines. And we would rebalance the 28 corridor. It's being brought forward from that scenario too, where we would essentially, once again, remove the 28 local service that runs on that corridor and do it all with the rapid service, of course, once again, adding a couple of rapid stops there, but not having the full frequent service operating there. So, so it's really kind of a combination of the first 2 scenarios. Once again, I want to point out these are just ways to frame trade-offs and to talk through the severity of the issue of the problem that we're trying to deal with. So the end result might be one of these change buckets. It might be none of them. It might be a combination of all 3. We wanted a way to talk about these changes with the public before we went out there, since we're on such a tight timeline. So we're going to begin multilingual outreach soon. There's right now, essentially, I will be going to the SFMTA board with the same presentation on Tuesday, And once again, it's just an informational item. There'll be no actions taken. It's just to alert the board as well as the general public the discussions we're going to be having. But if you have any specific feedback, please, let us know at sfmta.com/MuniCuts. As I noted, I do hope to be going back to the board March 18th with a final proposal, as we really need to get this implemented by the summer to start making the savings. And I think, there wasn't, I tried to touch a little bit on some of the financial issues, but there's a much more detailed financial update coming from Bree, and it sounds like she'll be at the MTA board on February 18th to have that discussion and make that presentation. So once again, this is all short-term related. It does not matter what the Muni Funding Working Group comes up with for these specific packages of changes we're talking about, because what the Muni Funding Working Group is working on is the long-term $320 million financial need we're going to have in 2026. So we are going to, of course, continue working with the Muni Funding Working Group, but I do want to just try to highlight that this is the near-term problem that we're trying to deal with, and current budget issues that we're trying to work through. So with that, happy to take questions and turn it back over to Kate.